Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot and a member of the PMDG 737 tech team. Welcome to our Autoland tutorial for the PMDG Boeing 737 in Flight Simulator 2024. Before we go into how to conduct an Autoland, let's quickly talk about when to conduct an Autoland. So the obvious answer would be when the weather is bad, but there are so many more options when an Autoland may be required in practical line operations. So let's go ahead and talk about a couple of them, and we are going to start with the obvious, with the weather. So whenever the visibility is less than 550 meters, respectively the RVR is less than 550 meters, and or the cloud ceiling is below 200 feet, then you are generally dropping below ILS Category 1 conditions, and therefore an automatic landing becomes necessary, unless you're equipped with a heads-up display, but more on that in the dedicated heads-up display tutorial. So, looking into an approach chart, we can see a couple of typical minima over here, and that would be for a Category 2 approach, around about 100 feet radio altitude and 300 meters RVR. For an ILS Category 3 approach, things depend a lot on how your airplane is equipped. If you're equipped with a failed passive autoflight system, which most Boeing 737s are, this shows by not having the cancel recall button on the MFD selection panel over here. If you're equipped with a failed passive autopilot, then you have to fly it down to what was formerly known as a Category 3A minima, so that is 50 feet radio and 125 meters RVR. If you're equipped with a failed operational autopilot system, then you can fly it all the way down to no decision height and 75 meters RVR, provided that the chart states that the ILS in question can do that. Contrary to popular belief, you can also do an automatic landing out of an ILS Cat 1 approach. In that case, all the Cat 1 minima do apply, however the airplane can still automatically land itself. For the airplane, it makes no difference whether you have a ground installation for an ILS Cat 2 or 3, or just a ground installation for an ILS Cat 1. A radio beam is a radio beam. So, that much about the weather. Now, let's talk about some further situations in which an Autoland may be conducted, and that is mainly, number one, for crew training purposes. So my former operator, for example, required you to do one Autoland and one monitored approach, but that's a different topic. So one Autoland prior to each recurrent simulator session, so that you could maintain your low visibility qualifications. And the airplane would often need an Autoland as well, namely when any maintenance is done on anything relating to the nav radios and a couple other items as well. Then Autoland in Cat 1 or better conditions needs to be conducted to prove that the system is still operative. And this would be required if the airplane should keep its ILS Cat 3 certification. Now that much about when to conduct an Autoland. Let's now talk about how to conduct an Autoland. And for this we have to start by talking about the requirements system-wise. So to be able to do an Autoland, you need to have both autopilots operative. You need that the nav receivers are both tuned to the ILS frequency, and both courses are also tuned to the ILS frequency. So pay good attention that you also set the offside course. The minimum is set to a radio minimum if a Category 2 or 3 approach is conducted, and to a baro minimum if it's a Category 1 approach. So be sure that you select the correct minimum. Now, let's take a moment to talk about the sequence of the automatic flight. So as soon as we are cleared for the approach and the approach mode is selected, we can and we have to engage the second autopilot. When the localizer is captured, we set the runway heading. Upon glide slope capture, we verify that go-around is displayed on the thrust mode annunciator. At this point, we're also going to get the single channel FMA for the approach. Below 1,500 feet radio altitude, the go-around mode is going to arm, but is not enunciated. However, you will see that flare mode is going to arm on the FMA. If the second autopilot is not engaged latest by 800 feet radio altitude, then you are not going to be able to engage it anymore and an autoland cannot be conducted. At 400 feet, the airplane is going to trim itself tail heavy, so that in case of a disconnection of the autopilot for whatever reason, the nose would automatically go up and you would be forced into a go-around maneuver. If you need to maintain the pitch in that situation, so go around below 400 feet, then you have to apply significant control column forces forward. Now, one of the positives of conducting a go-around out of an approach where an autoland was intended is that once both autopilots had been engaged, a fully automatic go-around is available, so the airplane can go around completely on its own then. Finally, to complete our briefing on what's going to happen during the autoland, at 50 feet, flare mode is going to engage, and the flight director bars are going to retract from view. At 27 feet radio altitude, the auto throttle is going to retard the thrust levers to idle, and once we touch down, we have to manually disengage the autopilot and conclude the landing roll manually. Alright, so that much about how to conduct the approach. We're now established on the final, we're cleared for the approach, so arm approach, engage the second autopilot, and call command A and B. We have localizer capture, so we are going to set our runway heading, which is 268, and we've got glide slope capture, so we are going to set our go-around altitude, which is 4,000 feet in today's case. From here, we are first of all going to fly a normal approach. So, if you're in VMC, you can very well just decelerate the aircraft at 4 miles. If you're in IMC, use the standard 5 nautical miles and ensure that you are fully stabilized when reaching the 500 foot gate in VMC or the 1000 foot gate in IMC. Now, at this point, we are just flying the approach down normally, so I do want to use a little bit of the time we have available to talk about some of the systems that are legally required according to the minimum equipment list and airplane flight manual restrictions to conduct an autoland. And you may be surprised about some of them. You need a dual channel autopilot, you need a low range radio altimeter and display for each pilot, so both need to be operative. You need a decision height display for each pilot. You need 2 digital air data computers. You need windshield wipers for each pilot. If one of the wipers is inoperative, even in good weather conditions, automatic landing is no longer approved. You need ILS receivers and displays for each pilot. You need flight mode enunciators for each pilot. You need 2 operative ADARUs in nav mode. You need dual hydraulic systems. You need 2 sources of electrical power, but do note that the APU generator may be used as an independent power source. So if one of the engine generators is inoperative and you only have the APU generator plus the second engine generator, you can still conduct an autoland. And you have to have both engines operating. The airplane is not approved for automatic landings on a single engine. Alright, we are reaching 5 DME. Now, I'm going to start configuring the airplane already. You could, technically speaking, delay this to when you reach 4 DME, since we're in VMC over here. Okay, we do have master caution, but that's just from the previous emergency descent that I did. Yes, I'm recording this video right after the previous one. Okay, so most automatic landings will be conducted with flaps 40, because usually autolands are conducted when you plan to, or when you are in low visibility conditions. However, flaps 30 is also approved for automatic landing operations, so you can do both flaps 30 and flaps 40. Usually flaps 40 is used so that you got a little bit lower deck angle, so that it is easier to see the approach lights on the approach. Alright, so now we are completely established on the approach, and now for us as pilots, the most important thing is to monitor the operation of the autopilot system. So things like strong winds, gusts, turbulence, all have the chance of ruining your approach, because the autopilot is quite a bit less accurate than a human pilot would be. Now we're going through 500 radio, and we check that flare mode is armed, which it is. Next up, passing 200 feet, we check that there is no failures, and we call continue, that's the alert height. We monitor the operation of the autoflight system, and if it destabilizes itself, which, as mentioned, can happen due to turbulence, go around. In today's case, we can see we're not really ending up on the runway, are we? So, go around, flaps 15, set, go around thrust. Since we had both autopilots engaged, a fully automatic go around is available. Positive climb, gear up. .400 feet, LNAV, and we can start retracting flaps. So flaps 5, target speed increases, flaps 1, and as soon as we're above the 1 speed, we can go into flaps up. Alright, so flaps up. Alright, and this is the automatic go-around. Now, let's reset this back into the approach so that we can start with the actual automatic landing. Alright, we are now established on the second approach, and you can see that the weather has changed slightly. So now we're in actual IMC, and I've switched to the winter wonderland conditions of the simulator. So heavy snowfall. I've also lowered the clouds a little bit to make up a typical scenario where an automatic landing may be needed. Today we are actually going to have to use the 5-mile gate for configuring the airplane, and we actually have to be stabilized by 1,000 feet. So let's see how this one is going to play out. Now, we do have the 5-mile ring over here, and we are about to reach it, so let's go ahead and start configuring. Gear down, flaps 15, and landing checklist to flaps. So, start switch is continuous, recall checked, speed brake, armed, green light, landing gear down 3 green, auto brake 3 set, flaps 25. And finally, flaps 40, speed checked, flaps 40. We are once again going to use VRF plus 5, going through 1500 AGL, the self-test has conducted, and flare mode is armed. So, complete the landing checklist, flaps 40, 40, green light, landing lights on, landing checklist completed, crew seated, clear to land. So, we are going through the 1000 foot gate, fully stabilized, and remember, fully stabilized means on speed within plus 10 minus 5 knots of the target, on localizer, on glide slope, with an appropriate attitude, and an appropriate vertical speed, and an appropriate thrust setting. So all of this is done. So now we are going to be looking out for the runway. I do very much recommend using the wipers for an approach like this. I know that they are very annoying in terms of the noise they make, but you really do want to see the runway as early as possible here. So let's do what most captains are going to do and turn our seat up a little bit so that we can actually see properly outside. Alright, we have ground contact. We're going through 500 radio, flare is armed. Remember, we have to conduct the rollout manually, so as soon as we're on the ground, disengage the autopilot and track the center line yourself. Going through alert height, the plane is in a good shape, we can continue. And there's our approach lights in sight, so continue the approach. Checked.
Minimums.
Continue. Normally. So, flare is armed.
10.
Touchdown. Disengage autopilot. And we got speed brakes up, thruster is normal. Come on. Autopilot should be off here. Okay. 60 knots. And here we are. Welcome to Hanover. So, that's how you do an automatic landing in the Boeing 737. As always, leave a like, comment and subscribe, put your questions underneath the video, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again right on the next one.